So one game that has absolutely had its ups and downs with media coverage and how hyped fans have been around the title leading into its release is none other than Sonic Frontiers, and of course the release date is finally upon us on November 8th. You can download this game right now on your Nintendo Switch eShop. You can download it on all platforms. You can go into your store locally and pick it up physically if you prefer to get it that way. And in today's video, I want to boot up this game very early on together, no gameplay spoilers, and share my honest opinions on the good and the bad of Sonic Frontiers, specifically on the Nintendo Switch hardware, because there has been a lot of dialogue on how this game will actually look, play, and feel. And I want to share my personal recommendation on whether or not I believe this is a game that is worthy of being in your Switch library right now. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below. Hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. And as I mentioned, guys, we are discussing Sonic Frontiers on the Nintendo Switch specifically, as I am just a little over an hour into the game so far, but I do think that I have a solid grasp on at least the opening areas and how the game performs as a whole. And the first thing that I will start off with is some of the positives, because this game does do a good job of refining some things like Sonic's combat system, and I can see the appeal of Sonic having a skill tree, as I think that that is a good fit for his character. And as it stands currently, if you look at the Metacritic scores for this game, it is in the low to mid 70s, hovering right around a 73 or so, but I wouldn't pay too much attention to that, because Sonic is either going to be the type of action style fast-paced game that you enjoy or you don't, and a lot of the Metacritic scores out there do tend to focus on more story-driven elements, and I'm not expecting Sonic to have the most jaw-dropping story as I progress through, but they do at least set the stage for you don't really know what's going on other than you gotta find your friends that you mysteriously got separated from and are in a strange new land, and you get the gist that Sonic actually has to go conquer these Starfall Islands and ultimately become victorious at the end. But I will say, in terms of the Nintendo Switch performance and my experience with it so far, because that's where I want to spend a little bit of time, it is rather impressive to me personally when you actually look at this game side by side with the other versions that, yes, clearly a PS5 or an Xbox Series X is going to run at a higher frame rate. It's going to look more impressive graphically, especially when it comes to reflections and things. But overall, when you look at the landscape of ports that we get to the Nintendo Switch, in my personal opinion, this one is done very well. I did not notice the 30 frames per second pulling me out of the fast action at all, and I actually was really enjoying some of the combat segments with the larger enemies, specifically having a lot of fun taking them down in the early portions of the game. And yeah, there is a learning curve. It feels kind of different than what you might expect, and there is some wonkiness that comes along with the controls as a whole, not really tied to the Switch version, but just how Sega programmed this game in general. I don't know if I'm entirely a huge fan of the camera and how it moves around Sonic when you move the analog stick. There's definitely some stuff that I feel like could be fine-tuned or readjusted for a better experience overall, but I also think being so early into the game that could absolutely start to grow on me as I get more accustomed to the style of controls that you're expected to adhere to really progress in the game, especially if you're playing on the harder difficulties, which, to cover that briefly, the game does have 3 difficulty settings out of the gate. It also has something that is like a fast mode, or a mode that if you are less familiar with Sonic games, which, to be honest, the most recent Sonic games I'm not all that much familiar with, because I've skipped a lot of them over the course of time or picked them up briefly, but it does give you a lot of fine-tuning options in terms of how you want to play the game. And to be transparent, I don't know if I'm the biggest fan of that. I definitely think like it gives me more options than I know what to do with, and I don't want to screw up the game or play it like differently than the developers entail. So I don't know, sometimes difficulty trees and different difficulty options are nice, but then whenever you start to actually be able to customize things like Sonic's starting speed and then like how fast he can go in certain environments and steering sensitivity and all the bounce height, like there's just a ton of options on this, and it does seem a little bit like, why is that there? Why are you not just trusting that how you designed the game is how it should be played, and it's as simple as that? Now, I will say that the open zone traversal definitely fits Sonic, and it feels really nice to see somewhere way off in the map that you can actually go and get to. And yes, you do have that menu mission style bar that you often see in games directing you to the next main story mission, but there's a lot of small puzzles along the way, and I can see really this game laying the ground foundation of upgrading Sonic as he goes forward, and you ultimately feel like a more powerful character is developing as you go along, and that is very exciting to me personally. Now, in terms of the open zone game layout being very exciting for Sonic, it is also where some of the technical limitations are pointed out. I believe this is in all versions, but you definitely notice it on the Nintendo Switch with the amount of texture pop in and just object pop in as a whole that happens when you are boosting around full speed in the land. There are some things, even if you're not boosting around, just if the camera is panning over the world, there is just outright pop in that is really jarring. I mean, if you don't care that much about graphics, and I definitely am a gameplay first minded gamer, there's just still some things though that can't help but grab your attention when a giant object pops in out of nowhere, and it was clearly supposed to be there, but it just wasn't loaded in because of the technical limitations of the game. All of that said, I am really going to hammer home the point in this video that yes, the Nintendo Switch version of Sonic Frontiers, from a performance standpoint, other than what the game honestly struggles with on all platforms from what I can see, runs really good at the end of the day. And this is not a version that is necessarily a downside. I did not get to play it a whole lot in handheld mode yet, but that seems to perform similar, and having the ability to switch between docked and handheld play on a game like this, I think is a big upgrade. But if you really do want the best graphical experience, there is absolutely a noticeable gap between the Switch version and the PS5 and Series X versions out there. But that said, this is not a noticeable drop off in quality, at least from my personal experience playing through the very beginning stages of the game. Now, in addition to the open zone traversal, which is very cool, of course we all know those cyber zones to expect, and only playing a couple of those, one of which I got really hooked into over and over again, decided to keep grinding through, didn't get an S rank, but I will go back and do that eventually, and I just had a lot of fun in these stages. This is classic 3D Sonic. If you enjoyed more of the recent entries in the 3D Sonic library of games, and just over the last 10 years or so that Sonic has been pumping out games in the modern era, this is that style of gameplay. But I do think they did a good job with the soundtrack in these worlds, and kind of just feeling like that fun, classic, arcadey, more style Sonic game versus the more open zone, not Breath of the Wild-esque, but that giant landscape. Something major is going on in terms of story, and there's threats around you with giant enemies. It's a nice breakup to be able to go between the cyber zone classic levels and back to the more open zone layout that has that more serious vibe and feel to it, in addition to things like puzzles that I think are a welcome addition to the Sonic formula. And for all Sonic fans out there, from the series director himself, you have to know that this is the direction and the base template that is claimed to be the direction for the series for the next 10 years or more. So it's like, yeah, we're gonna be on this ride of open zone Sonic games for a while, and I do think that Sega legitimately created a fun game with this. Is there weird stuff that happens when fighting some of the bigger enemies or traversing through the level? Yeah, there is. It is not a bug-free game, but I do think that that extra development time and Sega pushing it back probably helped it launch in a whole lot better state than it would have otherwise. And again, to hammer home the point that the Switch port looks incredible when you are actually able to fight giant sized bosses compared to Sonic fully moving around, slamming down their arms, you're running up the side of them. The giant field bosses that you encounter in this, the fact that they run as smooth as they do on the Nintendo Switch on this port of the game was really a cool one to me. I will say that I, at one point in time, when caught up in the combat, really didn't want anything more from this experience. If I was only able to buy this game on the Switch, I would be happy with it with no complaints in terms of the visual quality and how smooth the game looked while I was fighting this giant enemy on screen, and it almost made it feel a little bit next gen for the Switch compared to some of the other ports that we see hit the system. So while it is not a perfect port by any means, I do think that Sega took their time with this version of the game, and they seem to have created a great experience. All of the footage you are seeing on screen is captured directly from my Nintendo Switch, and it doesn't look bad compared to the other guys. And the fact that you have portable play along with docked play makes me not regret this purchase, because I really was curious this whole time how Sega would pull off this port on the Switch, because when I was looking at the trailers, it did look like a graphical style of a game that is fine-tuned and more fitted towards the current gen consoles, being the PS5 and Series X, and I was really curious if we would be looking at a stark drop off on the Switch, and fortunately that is not the case. So who is this game for? Somebody that likes fast action games with platforming, adventure, a decent story, but I'm definitely not going to say that is a selling point of it. Even the voice acting at certain times just seemed lackluster and not really all there in the investment in the characters. If they did even a quarter of the quality that we've seen in the recent Sonic movies with this story, I would be much more happy, but don't buy it for the story. I'm not going to write it off yet. I'm still going to go into it with an open mind as I progress through the rest of the game, but I would definitely say that the gameplay is king in this particular installment. And while there is some adjustments that I personally would desire to have in the controls department and some of the kind of crazy camera work that does ultimately happen, I still think that the variety of enemies that I've come through so far in the very early portions of the game, as well as switching up the pace with multiple puzzles and with different side cyber zones to go conquer, and then you're leveling up Sonic and upgrading his skill path the whole time, I can confidently say that in my personal opinion, this is the best Sonic game in recent memory, period, so far, at least in my initial early gameplay experience. And I do think that it runs fantastic on the Nintendo Switch hardware, which was a big question mark for me personally. So I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video, all your personal thoughts and feelings on Sonic Frontiers. Are you getting it today? Are you getting it anytime soon? Maybe you're waiting for more reviews or a sale. Share all those details in the comments down below, and tell me if you did pick up the Switch version of this game, how you personally feel like it runs, because am I overselling it with how smooth I feel like this game is ported to the Switch in comparison to what it looks like on the other consoles? I definitely think it's a quality port, but I do want to hear from you guys and your personal experiences, and if you've made it into the game further, maybe it does fall apart at some point. Does the pop in and stuff on the graphical end bother you, or is it something that you can live with and ultimately you're still having fun with the title? And if you're not sold on the game yet, what is it that has kind of turned you off now that we've gotten the review scores out there and you can see full-length reviews from multiple channels and news outlets online? So regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around this topic. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, which is on screen right now. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.